Today, we are not simply living longer, we are dying longer.
When healthcare journalist Max Lugavere's mother was diagnosed with a form of Parkinson's, he immediately began researching best practices for improving brain health through food.
Let's talk about what you should probably be minimizing in your diet.
I'm never going back to a bad relationship.
Correct.
And I'm sure not going back to a bad relationship with food. I'm only going to love foods that love me.
Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. This episode series is called The Doctor and the Nurse. Dr. Daniel Amen and I break down the highest performers in all different areas. He goes deep into the brain science. I interview on the actionable tools, and we put it together for the most incredible episodes to bring to you how you can perform at your highest level. Today, I'm talking with Max Lugavere on the topic of nutrition optimization. So let's dive in. Max Lugavere, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for coming on, brother. The focus of this episode is to figure out the best actionable game plan for maximizing nutritional value for mental and physical performance. So let's just dive in here and start building out high performance meals or foods. All right. So what would you say the best nutrition is for having the sharpest mind throughout the day?
Man, could start in so many different directions. There's so many different places to take it. But I would say for one, let's talk about what you should probably be minimizing in your diet. And I think there is a burgeoning body of evidence showing how ultra-processed foods are not good from the standpoint of cognitive performance, of long-term brain health. And these are the foods that typically line our supermarket aisles. You definitely want to do your best to minimize your consumption of those foods. Not only do they increase risk of Alzheimer's disease, new research shows, but they can have a negative impact on your cognitive performance. They can negatively potentially impact metabolic health and the like. And these are the foods that are shelf stable. They tend to be dilute of protein. They tend to be nutrient sparse, highly calorie dense. They tend to have that characteristic known as hyperpalatability, which means you typically, have a lot of trouble moderating your consumption of those foods. We're all guilty of it. That's how they're engineered. And so I think you're better off minimizing those. And then, so what do you replace them with? Well, whole foods. And there's a lot of debate now. We live in the era of the diet wars. Particularly on social media, low carb, low fat. Should I be carnivore? Should I be vegan? The lower rung of my food pyramid is essentially just prioritize whole foods. And then we can get into the specifics. If you're prioritizing whole foods, you're typically one step ahead of everybody else, to be quite honest today. I mean, 60% of the calories that your average American consumes comes from, ultra-processed foods for children. That proportion is even higher. It's about 70%, and certain demographics are even higher than that. So whole foods. And then I am definitely pro-omnivore. So I take the stance, and it's a data-backed stance, that animal source foods are of crucial importance to the brain, as are plant-based foods. So both. I'm a huge fan of foods like grass-fed, grass-finished red meat, eggs, wild fatty fish. If you can't afford wild, farmed is fine. It still provides an incredible source of omega-3 fatty acids. And if you can't afford grass-fed, grass-finished beef, or the most pristine and expensive eggs in the supermarket, worry not, because any egg is a cognitive multivitamin. Red meat is a great source of protein, dietary creatine, other micronutrients that we know are crucial to the brain. And we are starting to see now that higher protein intake not only increases healthy aging, the odds that you're going to age well, but is associated with less amyloid buildup in the brain, which Dr. Amen can speak to. Amyloid beta plaque is this pathological feature associated with Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative conditions. And then on the plant side of the spectrum, I think there's no arguing that dark leafy greens are super important from the standpoint of brain health. We have lots of data on this. We have lots of biological plausibility indicating that carotenoids and fiber and Vitamins like folate, which are abundant in dark leafy greens, are very important to brain health. I think fruit is incredible. There are a number of fruits that I like to prioritize for optimal brain performance. Avocado is actually a fruit, and there's data suggesting that avocado consumers compared to non-consumers, there was one study, or I believe it was a meta-analysis, that found that across every single tested cognitive domain, avocado consumers performed better than non-consumers, and that included guacamole. So when they ask you,
Oh, come on, yes.
if you mind that it's extra for the guac, I say it's an investment worth making in your brain health and performance.
Such good info there, Max. Okay, let's say you're about to step on stage for your biggest talk. What is on your plate? What are you eating before you go out there? Is it the English breakfast with baked beans and whatever they eat over there in England that I know you love so much? What's on your plate?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the full English. It's one of my favorite breakfasts, and I'm not saying that it's that everything on the plate is good for you, but there's a lot of good on it. And no, for me, I think I like to keep my blood sugar stable. There's equivocal evidence on blood sugar and how it affects cognitive function, but subjectively, I think most people, when not reeling from the reactive hypoglycemia that can occur due to a high sugar, high carb breakfast, most people would, I think, subjectively recognize that keeping your blood sugar nice and even is going to make you feel better in the short term, at the very least. And so I generally like to prioritize a high protein breakfast. There's also data suggesting that when we eat consistently a high protein breakfast, we tend to consume fewer calories over the course of the day. It's really helpful in terms of regulating your hunger. So for people that feel that they're hungry all the time, that why can't I stop snacking? Prioritizing protein for your first meal of the day seems to be really important. And, insofar as cravings for sugary, ultra-processed snack foods can have a negative impact on brain health and brain function, particularly when consumed chronically, when overconsumed. That is a brain healthy recommendation to prioritize protein for your first breakfast. So for me, I like to consume eggs. I'll eat 2 to 3 eggs every morning, particularly before I have to perform. I also like low sugar fruits like berries. We know, for example, that the anthocyanins, which are the pigments found in blueberries, seem to improve cognitive performance. There's some good clinical data on this. If I'm at a breakfast buffet, I'll prioritize the eggs. I'll prioritize low sugar fruits like berries and things like that. I try to avoid grain-based foods for my first meal of the day unless I have a workout, soon after. I don't really do much fruit juice, or I will do whole fruit. I think whole fruit is fantastic. Well, as I mentioned, berries and stuff like that. I'm not really a big fruit juice consumer. Even though they're actually counterintuitively, there is some data suggesting that orange juice can be helpful and improve various biomarkers. But yeah, I'm prioritizing protein, healthy fats, and fiber from whole fruit.
Oh, I love it. So it's eggs and blueberries with holding the side of Pringles. You're going to pass on that, or any kind of Frosted Flakes.
Yeah. And I also sometimes will add egg whites to my whole eggs because, I try to eat 2 to 3 whole eggs a day. But if I want to increase the protein even further, because, I think most people think that an egg contains like
not much.
A ton of protein. One egg only contains 6 grams of protein.
Oh, 6. And 7 fat, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so even like 3 eggs is not really enough protein for me to start the day with. That's like 18 grams of protein. Sometimes I'll do 3 whole eggs and I'll add 2 to 3 egg whites into the mix. So I'm getting, instead of 18 grams of protein, suddenly I'm getting 28 or 31 grams of protein, which is
this is fascinating.
Putting me in that ballpark.
You know what? It's one of those YouTube videos where we're like, Max, what are you eating on a daily basis? And we go behind the curtains. So leading into that, talking about protein, the egg whites, now talking about something you and I are both passionate about, and try to figure out, how do we get absolutely yoked? Just muscles bulging out of our ears is what we're going for here. So what would you say if you're looking for muscle building, physical performance? What are you focusing on?
That's a great question. I think that the most important thing to focus on is actually training, resistance training. You have to provide that stimulus to your muscles to adapt,
Good point.
to grow stronger. So you have to be doing that. That's step number one. That's also step number two and step number three. You have to be resistance training. Step number four is hitting your protein target for the day. And what the data shows is that you want to aim for a target of about 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of lean mass. So if you have a lot of weight to lose, you can use your goal weight as an approximation. Not everybody has access to a DEXA scan, unlike you, David. But
You don't want it.
yeah, it seems like a hassle. But if you have access to an in-body bioelectrical impedance, I mean that's a great option as well. But for somebody who's just trying to do quick and dirty back of the napkin math, use your goal weight because that's a good approximation of your lean mass, and multiply that by one. Well, I guess first you have to figure out what that is in pounds because we use the imperial system here. But
You're too British for me, Max.
you can use 0.72. So you can multiply your goal weight by 0.72, and that'll give you the number of grams of protein per pound of ideal weight or lean mass that you want to consume every single day. So after resistance training, you want to try to hit that in protein every single day. You can use protein shakes to accomplish that. There's nothing magical about protein shakes. You don't need them, but they can be a convenient and low cost way of hitting that protein target. And then consistency is the name of the game. You just have to show up, hit that muscle, hit every muscle group twice a week. Seems to be what the current evidence suggests as being a sort of optimal level to reap the most bang for your buck. Hit your protein target, and then of course prioritize sleep, hydration, and maybe throw some creatine, on top as well.
And everybody's wondering, Max, do you put carbs in too, or no?
Well, carbs are not essential for muscle building, although they do provide an anti-catabolic role. And the world's greatest athletes tend to prioritize carbohydrates in the diet because carbohydrates provide glucose, which is the preferred fuel source for high intensity anaerobic exercise. So when really trying to maximize your lifts in the gym, it can be quite helpful to consume carbs from a performance optimization standpoint.
Nice. Max, very, very interesting. Thank you. So we know how to keep our brains sharp, our muscles big. One thing I've always wondered, why is it so easy in, breakfast, lunch to keep it dialed in, but in the evenings, dinner time or even after dinner time, it's just really hard. It's like it's its own beast. I find myself watching a show or I'm going for some popcorn and you just can't really cut it off. Is there anything going through the brain that you know of that makes breakfast, lunch easy and dinner really hard for people?
Yeah, well, this is actually a pretty good strategy for fat loss. We tend to get really hungry later at night, and there could be cultural influences there. Dinner tends to be our most social meal. We tend to be distracted when eating dinner. Whether it's via dinner time conversation or, eating dinner as we're watching TV or using our smartphones and devices and the like. So one way that works for some people is to, it's a lot easier to eat light throughout the day when you're on the go and then to kind of save up your calories for that dinner time meal. That is one strategy that I know many people employ. There's also intermittent fasting, which can be helpful as a way of curtailing post-dinner calories. Because after dinner, we tend to consume purely junk food, most of us.
Yeah.
Like the snack foods that you're eating around the television for dessert, for example. Like nobody's prioritizing protein as their, Netflix binge watch snack, right? So cutting off your calorie consumption post dinner, I think can be really helpful. Not being distracted while you're eating is actually, there's data that suggests that people tend to consume about 15% more calories when distracted while eating. So you want to generally be, and there are some other psychological hacks that are out there. Use a smaller portion sizes. If you use a smaller plate, the coloring of your plate might influence to some degree your hunger level. So there are all those variables as well. But generally, my stance is if you're prioritizing whole foods and you're prioritizing specifically protein, you're going to be less likely to overeat because protein is the most satiating macronutrient, and it tends to reduce your cravings for carbohydrates and fat, which are basically energy. And so for dinner, for me, I'm always prioritizing protein. It's the centerpiece of my plate.
Well, I think it's interesting, right? Like giving yourself a stop time where the continuum of time stops and you can't eat afterwards instead of leaving it as open-ended, and that's kind of when snacking happens. I think it's important to go into these psychological tools. And do you have more that you use? Because I find people, you get on a plan, you get excited, you're like, yes, I'm going to do this. And then they just fall off the wagon, not because they don't know what to do, but more of the psychology behind it of they just crumble.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are other interesting hacks. Like if you drink a glass of water before dinner, before your meal,
Ooh,
you tend to consume fewer calories drinking a glass of water.
Okay.
There are a few mechanisms there. I mean, I think for one, our cravings for food tend to commingle with our thirst sensors because food is a source of water, or at least it has been prior to the advent of ultra processed foods, which are typically dehydrated to preserve shelf life. But food is generally a source of water. And so if we're thirsty, sometimes we feel more inclined to overeat. So drinking a glass of water before your meal can be helpful. I mean, if you're really struggling, you can also add more fiber to the meal, which fills you up. But you just want to do that slowly because consuming a lot of fiber, particularly if you're not adapted to it, can cause GI distress. But yeah, those are generally my tips. Prioritize protein. Fill up on protein first. And then whatever hunger you have remaining after that can be, you can fill in the margins with your grain of choice or your starch of choice, what have you. But protein generally, it's the most satiating. Protein is the most important macronutrient from a body composition standpoint, which isn't to say that carbs and fats are essential. And, we do have an essential requirement for fats and carbohydrates. Carb containing foods can be very healthful as well. So I'm not saying to not consume carbs or fats or anything like that, but generally we want to prioritize protein, which also tend to be a rich source of other nutrients that we know are supportive of brain and metabolic health, et cetera.
It's pretty fascinating, right? Like you can get as simple as you can talking about protein, and that's the constant theme throughout this, protein resistance training. And you're going to be ahead of about 95% of the population. And then it's just the small granular details that you can add in there, here and there, what not to eat, timing, all that kind of stuff. So I love how you break that down. Now, do you subscribe to, and I was doing some research on this because I heard about it not too long ago. In 1996, this doctor, Peter Diamandou, he wrote a best-selling book called Eat for Your Type, the blood type diet. Is there anything to that, or is that just hype?
It's just hype. There's no real, well, I always like to I think it's really important to remain open-minded.
Good point.
And think about where this idea might have come from. There's no science backing a blood type diet, but, the big rocks for most people, the big levers are going to be what I've already mentioned: prioritizing protein, minimizing consumption of ultra-processed foods. There may be some reason to prioritize certain foods based on blood type. It's not a science. I don't think we have good data on this, but it stands to reason that, were there, for example, an ancestral blood type that a blood type that pre-existed or predated, agriculture, that blood type, somebody with that blood type might be more adapted to consuming animal source foods, and perhaps less adapted to consuming grain-based foods and starches and things like that. But that's just pure speculation. And again, I don't think I think that's trying to find some, like trying to find like a plan within that is missing the forest for the trees.
No, good point. What are some of your other misconceptions that you see out there that just, get under your skin, that people are so behind? And and you need to debunk them right here, right now.
Yeah, for one, I mean, I think there's still a lot of fear mongering that occurs with regard to whole foods. And I think that's really problematic. Whether you see fear on social media perpetuated against foods like dark leafy greens or cruciferous vegetables, or foods like nuts, which, all data seems to suggest are beneficial from the standpoint of health, or to animal foods. We still see a lot of fear mongering with regard to, for example, red meat. And, you know, there's an analogy that I like to make. Most Americans overconsume sodium. They exceed the American Heart Association's dietary recommendation for daily sodium intake. And so many people will think, well, damn, I ought to stop salting my food, and put the salt shaker away. But 4% of the sodium that your average American ingests comes from the salt shaker. The vast majority comes from ultra-processed foods. That's why we tend to overconsume sodium. And similarly with saturated fat, which, there's an ongoing debate about the place of saturated fat in a healthful diet. Only about 3% of the saturated fat that your average American ingests comes from whole, unprocessed red meat. The vast majority comes from confectionery products like desserts and things like that, sandwiches, mixed dishes like lasagna, pizza, and things like that. So I think it's really important for us as health advocates to not demonize whole foods, but especially not highly nutrient-dense whole foods that have a lot to offer in terms of their nutritional benefit. And I think red meat is one of those foods. Eggs continue to be demonized. We know now that for most people, there are exceptions to this, but for most people, dietary cholesterol has no downside with regard to cardiovascular risk. There's a lot of upside to be gained from eating egg yolks. So I think it's really important to get back to reason and common sense when it comes to our dietary choices.
Well, you are the best follow on social media, on Instagram, and how you debunk, and just people just get so fired up about it. But it's great. I would pay good money to have you, Saladino, all these different people of different camps do a live debate. It would be fascinating, man. But hey, Max, super appreciate you coming on here, dropping knowledge in the mental and the physical, and going behind the scenes, telling us what's on your plate. As we wrap up here, can you tell us about the worldwide phenomenon, Little Empty Boxes, which I was so honored to be at the first showing? Tell us about it, why it's near and dear to your heart, and how can we all check it out?
Yeah, so this is the first ever dementia prevention documentary, and it's available to watch at littleemptyboxes.com. It's a documentary I've been working on for 10 years. It's the most important thing I've ever done. And if you are at all concerned about your long-term brain health, if you have had dementia in your family lineage, this is a film that you're going to find solace in, you're going to find answers in, and it's a project that means the world to me, and it follows my why. My mom had dementia for many years, and the film is a tribute to her, and it's a tribute to the science of dementia prevention. And again, it's the first ever film to tackle this subject. So it's a great film to watch with family members, even with community groups and the like. And it's a real movie. It's a 1 hour and 45-minute film. So check it out at littleemptyboxes.com. And then I host my own podcast called The Genius Life, which you've been on, David. So is Dr. Amen. And we have a lot of fun there. So yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. Come and find me and say hi.
Dude, you're the best. Max, always fun. You're brilliant. Thank you again for your time, and we will see you soon. Fresh Corn Grill, West Hollywood. I'm giving away the secret spots.
Giving away the secret spots. Thanks, David.
Thanks, brother. So now let's check in with Dr. Daniel Amen and what's going on in Max's brain when he talks about nutrition optimization. In this episode, we have Max Lugavere. He is a nutrition expert, one of the leaders, really, in book Genius Foods, Genius Life, Genius Anything. We really focuses on nutrition in the brain. This episode of High Performance, focusing on nutrition optimization.
I think fruit is incredible. There are a number of fruits that I like to prioritize for optimal brain performance. Avocado is actually a fruit, and there's data suggesting that avocado consumers compared to non-consumers, there was one study, or I believe it was a meta-analysis, that found that across every single tested cognitive domain, avocado consumers performed better than non-consumers, and that included guacamole. So when they ask you,
come on,
Yes.
if you mind that it's extra for the guac, I say it's an investment worth making.
So Max is talking about avocados and the power food that avocados are for the brain. I know that you like your avocados. Can you take us in depth of why avocados, might be the number one food for your brain?
I had guacamole last night.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
At Javier's here in Newport Beach.
Oh, come on.
It was
Now,
so
that's the
good.
best place. That is the best place. I'm jealous.
So I think it was in the 60s, the food industry paid two scientists, one from Harvard, one from Stanford, $50,000, a lot of money back then, to say fat was the problem, not sugar. And then in the early 80s, there was a national campaign to get fat out of your diet. Yeah. And we saw then obesity skyrocket and mental health problems skyrocket along with it. 60% of the solid weight of your brain is fat. If someone calls you a fathead, you should say thank you. Low-fat diets go with depression, and they go with learning problems. And so avocados has omega-3 fatty acids. It's just a great source of fat for your brain. There's a study from the Mayo Clinic that people have a fat-based diet. So avocados, nuts and seeds, salmon, green leafy vegetables, healthy oils have 42% less risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. Wow. People who have a simple carbohydrate-based diet, the American diet, standard American diet, SAD, bread, pasta, potatoes, rice, fruit juice, sugar, have a 400% increased risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. And in large part because it's the simple carbohydrate diet that boosts blood sugar levels and boosts pre-diabetes and diabetes and obesity. And I'm a huge fan of sort of high fiber avocados, low glycemic index means it's not raising your blood sugar, colorful fruits, low glycemic fruits. So I'm not a fan of all fruits. It's like blueberries and raspberries and blackberries and strawberries. Organic, right? Berries need to be organic or don't buy them.
Sure, yeah. Good point.
That's what's good for your brain.
Yeah.
And there's one just like simple question. Like we worked with BJ Fogg for a year and love him on Tiny Habits. So we came up with the mother tiny habit. Is this good for your brain or bad for it? You just have to ask yourself that one question. But then for food, it's, do you love food that loves you back? Because too often people go, but I love Rocky Road ice cream. I had that thought at one point, but I love it, but it doesn't like me. And I don't know if you've ever been in a bad relationship. I've had several. And now I'm married to my best friend, right? And I'm never going back to a bad relationship.
Correct.
And I'm sure not going back to a bad relationship with food. I'm only going to love foods that love me.
That's a good way to put it. All right. Well, if Taylor asked me to have ice cream, I'm going to let her know. Unless it's avocado ice cream.
Avocado gelato. Tana has a recipe in the Brain Warriors Way cookbook, which if you don't have it, I'll give you a copy.
I would love to. That's going to be a staple. So in this clip, Max talks about psychological tools that can help people stay on a lifestyle of healthy nutrition. Why we go fall off the horse and eat more food at night compared to the morning, and just some tips and tricks that you can lock in on your psychological tools for nutrition. I think it's important to go into these psychological tools. And do you have more that you use? Because I find people, you get on a plan, you get excited, you're like, yes, I'm going to do this. And then they just fall off the wagon, not because they don't know what to do, but more of the psychology behind it of they just crumble.
Yeah, I mean, there are other interesting hacks. Like if you drink a glass of water before dinner, you tend to consume fewer calories drinking a glass of water. I mean, if you're really struggling, you can also add more fiber to the meal, which fills you up. But you just want to do that slowly because consuming a lot of fiber, particularly if you're not adapted to it, can cause GI distress. Prioritize protein. Fill up on protein first, and then whatever hunger you have remaining after that can be, you can fill in the margins with your grain of choice or your starch of choice. Protein is the most important macronutrient from a body composition standpoint, which isn't to say that carbs and fats are essential. And, we do have an essential requirement for fats and carbohydrates. Carb containing foods can be very healthful as well. So I'm not saying to not consume carbs or fats or anything like that. But generally we want to prioritize protein, which also tend to be a rich source of other nutrients that we know are supportive of brain and metabolic health.
What does protein do to the brain? Like Max talking about the importance of protein for overall health, body. Is there some kind of impact that protein is having on the brain?
Well, indeed, because it helps you make neurotransmitters. They come from protein. It helps the structures in your brain. It's absolutely essential. Your brain won't work right if you don't have enough protein.
So good. So it's physical, obviously, but very important for the brain. Max talked about some tools, some psychological tools he used. Now, I know you are the master of these tools. I use ANTS with athletes that I work with. They absolutely love it. Can you talk about ANTS and then any other tools that you like for, being able to stay on a healthy brain plan?
Well, it's the questions, right? It's the tiny habits. Is this good for my brain or bad for it? Start every and you want to know your goals. So one of the first things I do with almost all of my patients is the one-page miracle. On one piece of paper, write down, what do you want?
Love it.
Your relationships, your work, your money, your physical, emotional, spiritual health. What do you want? And then you just ask yourself, does it fit? Does my behavior? So it's not what I should do. It's, well, what do I want? And does this fit what I want? So it causes more cognitive dissonance if you're like, oh no, I want to weigh 140 and this is not going to help me. Also, start every day with today is going to be a great day.
Yeah.
And end every day with what went well today. And notice the little lies that keep you fat, depressed, and feeble-minded. Everything in moderation. That's the gateway thought to cheating. And then I teach all of my patients not to believe every stupid thing they think. Thoughts come from all sorts of places. Good. They come from your ancestors. They come from the voices of your mom or dad. They come from your friends, your foes, the music you listen to, the news you watch. And thoughts lie all the time. And so whenever you feel sad, mad, nervous, or out of, just start writing down the nonsense that you're thinking and correct it. I have a children's book called Captain Snout and the Superpower Questions. And it's got like rated 4.8 out of 5 on Amazon. And it's got like 750 reviews. And parents go, I get as much out of this book as my kids do. Just teaching people. And there's nowhere in school they teach you not to believe every stupid thing you think. And, some of the lies of, oh, well, it's Friday, so I should drink. Or it's Easter, or July 4th, or Labor Day. I mean, or it's Christmas. Why do we celebrate the birth of the baby Jesus with alcohol and sugar? I'm not sure that's really a religious ritual.
Probably not what he was doing.
But I think it's just being aware that your brain uses 20 to 30% of the calories you consume. And so if you have a fast food diet, you're going to have a fast food mind.
Oof.
And I'm not
good.
sure you want to think Jack in the Box.
That's really good. That's really good. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Took a lot away from it. There's plenty more where that came from, and you can find another episode right here. Come on, you can click it right here.